Greetings, social psychologists. This is the last chapter of social psychology. You made it. The term is almost over. Let's get through this thing together because it's the chapter on cooperation. Basic definition of terms here. Cooperation, that is what happens when we trust others, are willing to communicate, and are willing to share. We're working together, probably towards some common objective. In competition, however, we are gaining rewards for ourselves while limiting opportunities for others. Just remember, go way back to the baby lab video, that people really, we are interested in gaining more for ourselves, but we're even more interested in gaining relatively more for ourselves. That is, if I have a choice between getting $10 and you getting $10, or me getting $8 and you getting $5, we're predisposed to choose the 8. Watch is going to keep coming up. So that's competition. Gain rewards for yourself, limit opportunities for others. So you get up to the top of the ladder and you're standing above everyone else and you kick the ladder down so no one else can get up. And remember the chapter on altruism, because there's not a universe of difference between cooperation and altruism. So go back to that chapter. Remember, we're neither purely selfish nor purely selfless. There's always something in it for us, even if it seems really, really abstract and unconscious. A question that came up after the altruism lecture is, look, if the definition of altruism is selfless action, helping someone else with no expectation of reward, but there's always an expectation of reward, then how can we save altruism? Well, two ways. One, that long, boring talk about you could have chosen to aggress against others to feel better, right? You chose to help others to feel better. But also because of the weird abstract nature of the gains for self sometimes. In kin selection. So I run into a burning building to save my brother's kids. My brother's kids share some of my DNA, and so it's in the interest of my DNA to take that action and save the next generation, even though they're not my direct descendants. But the person making that decision, is that on their mind? Is that thought even accessible to them? Or is it a mere predisposition that we have? So in that case, right, we've saved altruism because it is purely selfless in the way we'd conceive of it as a person making choices. Okay. And we have this strain between sexual selection and the communality of the organism. That is, that we are weak, pasty animals, you know. If you're like me and somewhat melanin deprived, then even the sun is your enemy, right? I can't go outside for extended periods. I'm so weak. We have to be together. We can't survive apart. And our genes want to be more represented than other genes in the next generation. And that's tension, right? It's tension between two poles. Okay. So what we're really talking about is those somewhat weak evolutionary arguments that people make when they don't really understand evolutionary pressures. So cooperation is really explained and investigated through a series of dilemmas. And these are called social dilemmas. A social dilemma is a situation in which the best interest or the goal of an individual conflicts with the best interest or the goal of a group. And this really derives from game theory. Like, game theory starts in maybe the 1950s, more or less. And then social psychology starts to pick up on game theory. Social psychology really gets started in the 70s. So two basic, let's say, philosophies of game theory. One would be the fixed sum or zero sum game, which is there's a set amount of resource, and if I'm winning, you're losing, right? You could, if I'm one up, you're one down in the relationship, and vice versa. If you're one up, I'm one down, and there is no both parties are up. It's impossible. It's a zero sum. Um, Versus integrative outcomes, and this is your who's the guy who wrote Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. This is your win-win situation that you're expected to negotiate for. It presumes that um, there is not a limited resource pool such that if I'm up, you're down. We in fact both can be up. We can get to the integrative solutions or synthesis, as whoever came up with that idea said. In fact, I'm going to look it up really quick because it's important. Seven Habits. Stephen Covey. Fantastic. Good. Now we've made our proper attribution. Let's talk competition. In competition, I mean, this is the backbone of the American political, economic, and legal systems, right? And there are definitive upsides to competition. Why is your cable bill so high? It keeps getting higher, right? You agree to pay $50 a month, and then 3 months later, you're paying $200 a month for your cable and your internet and your phone that you don't actually have. Well, it's because there's no competition. The two major cable companies in the U.S. In the early 2000s divided up America into regions and had non-compete agreements. So we get these territories, you get those territories. So they cooperated, and so they don't compete in the markets. There isn't another cable provider for you to go to. And this is why we get this ridiculous situation where the major networks can come in and go, like Disney, I'm going to do my own streaming network. Netflix, we're going to have a streaming network, but we're only going to carry people who agree with our price structures. And NBC and CBS, all access online. So if you want to watch Star Trek Picard or the other Enterprise show, Star Trek show, whatever it is, you have to stream their individual service. Right? If we had competition, then there would be incentives to bring those prices down. So people are using, they can't switch, they could switch to another service, and therefore you would lose that revenue. You have to compete. So when there's competition, at least limited competition, we get better, stronger, faster, cheaper, but there are risks as well. And the risks really derive from social identity, right? You work at company X, and your competitors at company Y, and every morning we come in and I'm trying to motivate you to outperform company Y. It's really easy for us to start building not only an esprit de corps, a team identity, but an out-group identity for the other guy, right? And the more that I'm in-grouping us and out-grouping the other, go back to the thing on stereotypes and back further to the thing on aggression, that's where we are, right? Okay? Political parties. It's fine to have the ideas that make you a Republican, and it's fine to have the ideas that make you a Democrat. But increasingly, the competition between the parties is weaponizing these human tendencies, right? Where one team is making themselves on purpose totally unacceptable to the other team. So the communication is totally impossible. That's bad. And when you refer to the other political party as traitors, yeah, unpatriotic, we're the patriot team and they're the commies and the open borders and the, hey, now competition has gone awry, right? Because now we're talking identity politics. conflict. Conflict often stems from social identity. And we'll talk about a couple of conflict scenarios here in just a second. But without the I'm this group and you're that group, the conflict is actually harder to bring about. So, for example, those political parties are both American political parties. And they both, at their core, swallow my bile while I say it, they both at their core probably have the best interest of their constituents at heart. Yeah. Whoever's the president needs to be the president for everybody. Yeah. So conflict is possible because we've divided up into opposing camps instead of two camps with some differences of opinions that both have the same objectives ultimately in mind. Okay. And conflict happens because we want relatively more. Back to the ABC Baby Lab video. We don't just want more. I don't just want more for me. I want more for me and less for you. That creates conflict. When you've climbed as high as you can, you just dig a hole around yourself. You dig a moat for everyone else to stand in. So you're that much more elevated above them. So let's talk conflicts. Two types, basically, realistic and perceived conflicts. You could perceive a real conflict, but the perceived conflict is not a real conflict. So in realistic conflicts, we're in competition for scarce resources. And the more I have, the less you have, and vice versa. We both need the thing. We'll in some way suffer without the thing. Now we're in competition. We're in competition for voters. Voters are a scarce resource. People who will actually come out and pull the lever or check the box or whatever. And so we're in competition for the voter. And a realistic conflict might also be responding to actual rather than perceived hostility from another party. Right? So if you threaten me, it's real that you threatened me and we have actual conflict. But in perceived conflicts, a gain for one group is not really a loss for the other group. Right? Just because I'm getting ahead more doesn't mean you're getting ahead less. So this is the argument for income inequality, right? Does wealth inequality matter? Well, not on its face, because when we have the capitalist system that encourages healthy competition, a few people get really rich, but everybody gets at least a little bit richer, and we all collectively have a better quality of life. Yeah, that's the argument. Okay. So the gain for the super rich isn't really a loss for you. When you compare yourself to the super rich, it feels really bad. Okay. But you haven't really lost out. You also have gained. The trouble is that the rich people are not content with just being richer than everybody else. They have to be the richest person, and they generate conflict. Their perceived conflict is if their workers make money, then they make less money, and that would be a problem. Um, yeah. So we get this influence on political systems, bribery. I saw a wonderful meme on the internet. Because of the crash in oil prices, oil companies are looking at firing a few senators like that. Political corruption happens, and that political corruption, that outside pressure on the system, creates gamesmanship where people know how to gerrymander districts, and democracy is really very shaky in America right now because of conflict. Okay. So there's scapegoating. Scapegoating is when we're helping you perceive a conflict. So claiming that our jobs are outsourced and that's the real problem. And there is some truth in that. some of our manufacturing jobs, in fact, are outsourced. They're outsourced to places where there aren't unions, there's not a history of unions, economic conditions are bad. People are willing to work for way less than Americans are willing to work for because it's more than they're currently making. And so China took a lot of our manufacturing jobs, but then their economy improved because they took our manufacturing jobs. And then people started demanding better conditions and more money. So those jobs went to Vietnam. And I know where they've gone now. And like textile manufacturing went to India and then Pakistan, and now it's leaving Pakistan for Indonesia or something. And then after that, their economy will do a little better. They'll start asking for more money. It'll go somewhere else. So in fact, that is somewhat of a problem. But the real problem in the American economy is automation, right? Machines do most of the work. Americans are out of work. They have no money to buy things with. So the big companies that fund the political campaigns encourage them to scapegoat immigrants and scapegoat foreigners, scapegoat India and China, so that you're not looking at the fact that their automation, their refusal to pay fair wages, their opposition to raising minimum wage and so forth, is the real problem in the American economy. Scapegoating immigrants, all right? Mexicans are crossing the border and taking your job. Wait a second, you're not entitled to a job. What are you, a socialist? Um, that was in the second New Deal that Roosevelt couldn't get past. The right to work. Everyone has a right to a job. Um, yeah. So people do cross the border and work. The socially appropriate term is guest workers. Um, Migrant farm laborers. You don't want to go to the farm and pick the cherries and the strawberries and the lettuce and stuff, do you? Have you tried it? It's brutal, backbreaking, below minimum wage work. And we sort of tolerate this shadow economy because if we paid Americans what Americans want to be paid to do that work, then all of your produce would go up in price. You'd have inflation. And that inflationary pressure on the necessities, it would be very problematic for the economy. So we tolerate this shadow economy of migrant farm laborers and the janitors and the all sorts of shadow economy. Minimum wage, below minimum wage labor gets done. So ICE raids some plant near the Mexican border and detains all of the immigrant labor, the undocumented immigrant labor, and charges them with crimes, but has nothing at all to say to the corporation that hired cheap immigrant labor instead of American citizens, right? And then that's on the news, and we scapegoat the immigrants and have nothing to say to the rich people who are in charge. Scapegoating, creating the perception of a conflict. There's no conflict between Americans and Mexican laborers. Okay. So foreigners aren't really to blame for outsourcing either. Corporations are. They go where the labor is cheapest. They offshore their accounts. They offshore their headquarters so that they don't have to pay American taxes, and then pass themselves off as American patriots. So we have to talk a little bit of morality here. And I'm a scientist. Like, I'm not here to say what's moral or immoral. There's no objective standard for that, right? And science is all about the objective standards. I can't disprove that something's moral or immoral. But if you give me a more concrete term, like is X thing causing more harm than good, well, then we can define our terms, what constitutes harm and good, and we can measure that, right? That's where I prefer to stay. But for here, we're going to examine what do people think is moral. I'm not going to lay any particular judgment on what people think is moral. I'm just going to tell you when we analyze the literature and look at the data, this is what we come up with. So I'm not here to make metaphysical claims. I'm not here to make statements about the underpinnings of reality. So we're going to open with two moral frameworks. The first is the social conventional morality. The second is the harm-based morality. So social conventional morality is totally arbitrary. It's just what a collection of people agrees on at a given time. That can change because there's no objective standard. If just everyone agrees we're going to change this element of morality, we do. Same-sex marriage, more or less worldwide. Same-sex marriage, hot button issue, rapid change. We started having openly gay characters on television in like the late 1990s, and then more people started coming out. Everyone knows someone who's gay. Most people have a family member who's gay, and same-sex marriage went from really heavy disapproval in the 1960s to maybe 70% approval here in 2020, right? Rapid change. It's totally 100% arbitrary to not like gay people and not like gay people getting married. There's no objective reason for that belief set. And because there's no objective reason, we've quite successfully gotten social change on what people believe on that issue. The other is harm-based morality, and harm-based morality is a bit more universal. We can somewhat objectively measure who is a victim. And when we have a victim, we have a perpetrator, and when we have a perpetrator, we can censure them. So more universally verifiable, more universal. I want to sidetrack here into the 3 pillars of morality. And this video is Frans de Waal, and he's going to talk about the animal evolutionary sort of basis of morality. What I want you to take from this video is that morality doesn't emerge from a vacuum. It doesn't spring fully formed from the head of Zeus or whatever. The holy books are not handed down and then we open them and become moral because we read them, right? People wrote all of the holy texts. That is, religion doesn't create morality so much as the inborn tendencies of humans create morality. And then we're driven to codify that morality and maybe make attributions, appeals to authority for that morality. And then after that, there's a push-pull between the authoritarian systems and the standards of the time. So Frans de Waal is going to identify 2 pillars of morality. Other scholars are going to identify 5. We're going to talk about 3 major and briefly 2 minor pillars of morality, just so you know there are minor pillars of morality. How do we get these? Well, we go through all of the texts that claim to be moral authorities, and we sort of distill down the basic rules that they have until we get the common elements, right? We're doing qualitative research here, and qualitatively, these are the 3 big things that every religion has in common. All the major religions push these 3 things: empathy, fairness, and authority, right? Empathy, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. You know what it's like to be accused in public, right? Does this person deserve worse than you deserve? Empathy. I know how you feel. Even rats have empathy. Frans de Waal doesn't do the rat with empathy thing. There's this really neat series of experiments. I'll try to remember to put it in the notes if I can find it. Where the rats with the restrainers. Did we do this in altruism? Maybe we did. The rats with the restrainers. One is restrained and the other's free in the cage. And there's another restrainer that has some chocolate chips in it, right? And the rat always releases the trapped rat before they eat the chocolate chips. And then they save a small amount of the chocolate chips for the other rat to eat. And then the scientist says, well, this means rats have empathy. And science goes, wait, we're really leery to attribute human emotions to animals like rats because we can't ask them any questions. There's no intersubjectivity. So she keeps doing experiments until she gets to wet rat, dry rat. So we're going to have a cage, and on this side is deep cold water and no floor, right? So this side has a floor. It's dry, it's warm, and there's a gate between them. Dry side rat can open the gate. Wet side rat cannot. Okay, and dry side rat always hears the squeals, the cries, the anguish of wet side rat in the deep cold water. Always opens the door. But this test is done in two conditions. In condition one, dry side rat has never served as wet side rat. In condition two, dry side rat has served as wet side rat. All right, now both rats always open the gate to save wet side rat. But the rat who has been wet side rat in the past opens the gate faster, right? And the only conclusion really possible here is that rats have empathy. Because this rat knows how it feels to be cold and wet, it works harder and faster to get the gate open with a sense of urgency, right? So that's a pillar of morality, and it has a bio basis. Fairness. Watch the video, the capuchin monkeys, where one gets cucumber, the other one gets a grape, right? The monkey is perfectly fine to work for cucumbers all day long until it sees someone else doing the same work and getting a grape, right? And then that party is over. Dogs have this. A dog will shake your hand 4 billion times in a row because it's just a natural behavior for dogs. It's inherently rewarding. You start shaking another dog's hand and giving him a cookie for it, and then come back and shake this dog's hand. He'll do it a couple more times. He's not as smart as a monkey, but he'll figure it out. Hey, wait a second. Where's my cookie? And stop cooperating, right? Fairness, it's inborn. Um, yeah, we're selected to look for and prefer fairness in the environment. And then authority. Um, you know what authority is. That's when someone's in charge and they tell you what to think and how to be and what to do. It's absolutely a pillar of morality that we do what the authority says. Right. So those are the three main pillars. And one of the big arguments that we're having in American society, one of the major political arguments we're having between red team and blue team is authority really moral? Right? By what objective basis can we say someone's in charge and we do what they say no matter what? What if the person in charge lacks empathy and behaves in a manner that's unfair? Should we still cede to them the authority to make all our decisions? Being a big argument about this. The same sex marriage thing. Can you imagine what it would be like if your loved one were in the hospital and you couldn't visit them because you're not married? Can you imagine what that would be like? Okay. Um, is it fair that a man and a woman get married, and when one of them dies, the other can inherit their property? But if a man and a man or a woman and a woman are in a relationship and want to get married and can't, if one of them dies, the other one is disenfranchised. Is that fair? No, clearly not. Um, good. But the authoritarian argument is like, well, in the Bible, it's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Oh, okay. Someone told you that God said that he doesn't like gay people. And that's the argument ultimately. It's the center of the argument that swirls out and illogically, irrationally argues against the empathy and the fairness arguments. So we're having this big argument about, what's authority actually good for ultimately. And then, of course, there are minor pillars. Of course, this is not all that there is to religion and religiosity and moral systems. There's this little stuff as well. So there's a bunch of them. Just for example, though, hygiene. Um, like every religion has some ideas about hygiene, but they can seem quite strange interculturally, right? Like safe sex in America would get a chilly reception in Yemen. Um, Yeah, that. Brushing your teeth all the time. Americans want to take showers like every single day of the week. Long, hot showers every day. You shower in the morning, then you go to the gym and you shower again. It's crazy how much people shower. You visit other countries um, that didn't enter World War II the way we did and make hygiene videos and seed the American culture with this idea, and people smell like human beings with human bodies, and you find it revolting, but they equally think that you're really weird for not smelling like anything. Maybe people from Muslim majority countries or even Sikh majority countries might be perplexed about the way Americans walk around with their hair just out all the time. You can see it. It's kind of weird. Um, yeah, and it's just exposed to the elements. It's getting dirty. You know, you're supposed to wrap your hair up and keep it away from the elements so that it stays clean, and then lovingly wash it on it during particular periods, and then wrap it back up. You go into church with your shoes on. Wow, wow. When you go into um, when you go into worship, you're supposed to take off your shoes, put them in the cloakroom, and then carefully wash your feet. What are you doing? Your feet touch, your shoes touch all manner of unspeakable things in the environment, right? Very different conceptions of hygiene. Um, and then food purity in particular, cleanliness and purity. They kind of go like that. So what is it appropriate to eat? Americans have so much privilege that sometimes we choose not to eat meat, or only some kinds of meat, or nothing that has ever been in contact with an animal product. We're a vegan, right? Um, that's weird. That's pretty weird. And I'm partially in that group. I don't eat mammals. I've made a moral choice not to eat mammals, which is weird. It's hard to explain other places because other places are so poor that if there is food, you eat it. You don't get to be picky. Americans have the luxury of being picky, right? So we put morality in our food, but sometimes in weird and unexpected ways. Gluten free. Almost nobody eating gluten free needs to. A substantial subpopulation of people eating gluten free don't know what gluten is. So if you've been diagnosed with celiac sprue syndrome and a medical doctor has told you to avoid gluten, you should do that. And just about everybody else, you're just overpaying for bread products at the supermarket. But other people are doing it and you admire them and they're in your in group. And it's just natural to eat what other people in your environment eat and make the food choices that they make. Is that morality? Well, it shows up. It just keeps showing up. It's a cultural artifact and it enters into religion just often enough, right? Like kosher and halal. Okay. So let's get back into the material. Um, Good. So another system here is the social fairness norms, and fairness can really go two ways. It could be distributive fairness, or it could be procedural fairness, right? So if we're talking wealth inequity, we're talking distributive fairness. Some people have hundreds of billions of dollars, and most people in America don't have, even before COVID-19, didn't have $400 in their bank account to weather an emergency. Most Americans have been one serious illness away from bankruptcy, and a few Americans have aggregated loads and loads of wealth and security to themselves and political power and all that. Is that bad? Is that bad? If you don't like the idea, then what's offending you is the distributive unfairness of it, the accumulation of resources in a few hands while other people are going hungry. Okay? A belief in procedural fairness, though, is that the rich people, do they deserve the richness? Did they work hard? Were they clever and intuitive? Did they earn what they got? Or was it merely an accident of birth? Or were there some crimes maybe committed along the way? Right? In the former case, we earn what we get, then we have procedural fairness, and actually it's just fine that some people suffer and some people do well, right? When you hear the scare words, redistribution of wealth, um, that's an argument that that the socialist team want distributive fairness, that they're going to take away the excess resources of some and hand them to others, right? Okay. So procedural fairness often relies on our ability to blame the victim. Remember that baseball is not America's pastime. Blaming the victim is America's pastime. We want to believe in procedural fairness, that if you work hard, you can succeed. All evidence to the contrary. If you work hard, you can succeed. And if we'd reached a point in America where we had less social mobility than we did in the 1920s, that would be a problem for us. It would be a problem. This is America. It shouldn't be that way. It's the land of opportunity, not the land of oligarchy and hereditary wealth and hereditary power. So we just blame the victim instead. If you're not making it, now there's plenty of jobs out there. You just haven't got your college degree. Oh, you got your college degree, but why did you get that degree? Did you do your research first? And so on. Okay. And then also in this category is false consciousness. And this is when someone of low status believes their low status is deserved, right? The system's functioning well because I have low status and I deserve low status. So maybe you're of low status, you don't like it. You have some solutions. If you're in my class, you're probably of low status. Congratulations. And the solution you've chosen to enact is to change groups. I'm going to go from the uneducated class to the educated class. Leaving behind the uneducated class can be difficult, expensive, and problematic, but the rewards might be worth it in the long run. They also might not. So here's a picture of some people potentially attempting to change social classes. It's no secret that the current president of the United States and leader of the Republican Party is not very sensitive, racially speaking. Okay. And it's pretty unusual to see people of color supporting this particular president at this particular time in history. But here are some people of color supporting the Republican Party. They're going to take a lot of flack from that at home, potentially. Which I know because I myself have left my social class. Right? My family is working class British. I'm the first person in my family to set foot on a college campus. never mind go all the way to a doctorate. I'm viewed with extreme skepticism on the British side of the family. They don't know what to make of me. We can't have conversations. You know, honestly, the stuff that they say is so stupid and ignorant that I don't want to have conversations. And neither do they. Because whenever they say stupid, ignorant things, I'm there with facts. It's difficult to leave your social class. It's expensive. It's labor intensive. Some people are going to have a harder time leaving their social class because they belong to a minority group easily identifiable from the color of their skin or their accent. But I've been able to blend and pass. Overall, I'm satisfied with the move, but something important has been lost. It would be nice to have a family. Another solution is social creativity, right? So when your group is on the outs, you look for positive aspects of that group membership. So this group is bad at this thing, but they're good at this other thing, and so I believe I will stay. Maybe your college is a big loser on the national sports scene, so you really button down and focus on their academic achievements. Well, we haven't been in the final four in 38 years, but at least our debate team and our chess club, right, are doing fine. And then the last solution here is going to be collective action. Um, here's Congressman John Lewis is a very young man crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Reverend Dr. King's place. Um, how do we get here? How do we get all these people to cross the bridge into the waiting, unloving arms of the riot police on the other side? How do we do that? Well, if the group has a belief in the unfairness of the system, um, I have a dream that one day we will be judged on the content of our characters, not on the color of our skin. It's unfair to judge people based on their skin color. It's completely irrelevant to their moral character. Communication, we can talk to each other. We have a network. The communication is open and effective. We are organized. We know where to be, at what time, where to lean, and how hard to push. And we have some leadership that helps define our ideology, that helps create the groupiness of the group. These are the shared beliefs, and because you have this in-group membership, you have these beliefs. The more that you can do that, the more you can get collective action. Okay. System justification. What keeps us, in other words, from doing all this stuff, especially from believing in the unfairness of the system? One problem is local comparison, which is that we don't go out and gather data. Poor people don't compare themselves to rich people, they compare themselves to other poor people. My neighborhood's not that great. And I look around my neighborhood and I drive a 10-year-old Ford, but the neighbors drive a 20-year-old Hyundai. I'm doing okay, right? I'm doing okay. But if I take my 10-year-old Ford into my father-in-law's neighborhood, that I'm parking it behind a Lincoln and across the street from a Mercedes, maybe I'm not doing that great after all, right? Comparison is local. So an example of this is that women compare their domestic workload to that of other married women, not to the men that they married. Domestic work is skewed very heavily towards women in the United States. Women do virtually all childcare activities, and the younger the child, the truer that is. Women do most of the housekeeping, the house cleaning, the cooking, ironing, laundry folding, you name it. Men do the outside of the house work, which is about a quarter of the work that women do inside the house. So why aren't women in open rebellion about this? Because they look at other women, and if they're doing a lot more than other women, they complain about it and try and get equity. If they're doing a lot less than other women, they feel fine. Um, the Southern strategy. The Southern strategy is effectively to pit poor white people against poor black people. The racism is inherent to Southern strategy politics, to authoritarian politics. Right? Don't look at the oligarchy. Don't look at the massive wealth inequality. Someone's cutting in line, right? We have affirmative action. And so these black people are taking your kids' college slots. We have immigration. These Mexicans are taking your job. Don't look up here at the wealth inequality. Look at these scapegoats. And if you can inconvenience people with brown skin and lock their kids in cages at the border and just inconvenience people and hold them up, and the more you can do that, the more that poor white people feel like they're winning. They might even get tired of winning, and they'll keep voting for you even though that's not in their best interest. In other words, people don't want more. People want relatively more. And the comparison is a local comparison. All right. And the more that we have a belief in the procedural fairness, the more that we justify the system that we have. If it's a fair system, right? So anti-immigration arguments, all these illegals in the country, there's a system. They should wait in line like everybody else. Don't cut in line. And never mind the fact that the system is so jacked up, nobody can navigate it. Okay. Democrats and Republicans have complicated that system to the point of absurdity. Okay. Social dilemmas. I promised you a look at these earlier. Here's some classic dilemmas. In the Commons dilemma, this is an Old English situation. We have a bunch of farms kind of in a circle, right? And then in the middle of the circle is the commons. This is the land that everyone owns collectively. It's grassy, there's a stream or a river, and everyone can freely graze their sheep on that land. Now, if all of the farmers graze their sheep on that land, then the sheep eat all the grass and everybody loses. There's no more commons to graze. All of our yields go down. But if any one farmer chooses not to graze their sheep, then they lose and everybody else wins. So this is that situation where the individual interest of one person conflict with the collective interest of the group. In the collective interest, we all graze our sheep a little bit and our yields all go up a little bit. But it really benefits me to cheat. As long as everyone else is just grazing a little bit, I can graze a lot and the commons won't be ruined. But if everyone grazes a lot, the commons are ruined. And if I break the rules, then there's no reason for everyone else not to break the rules, because I'm getting rich now at their expense collectively. That's a dilemma. Okay. And we have the free rider problem. And I guess in the modern world, we're calling this the contributions dilemma. The situation is when you get on the bus, you don't pay. You walk right past the driver, you take a seat, but the fare slot is on the way out. It's at the back door. So as you get off the bus, you're expected to pay for your ride, however far you went. put in the appropriate fare. But that means you could walk right by the fare box, right? You've already had your ride. And we expect some number of people not to pay for their fare. That's why we did it that way, because buses serve indigent people as well as everybody else. If most people pay, the bus is fine. We budgeted for a few free riders. But if nobody pays, then we can't maintain the bus and pay for fuel and pay for a driver, right? If most people ride for free, bus goes bankrupt, no bus. Democracy is a classic free rider problem. You get the, let's say, benefits of government, whether or not you vote, right? Come November, it just doesn't matter that much whether you individually cast a ballot or don't cast a ballot. There's going to be a more or less functional government. If you do vote, your individual vote is unlikely to change the outcome. I said cannot. I mean, philosophically, certainly in the last 4 years, we've seen a couple of cases where one person's vote absolutely could have swayed an election one way or the other. It was, which Virginia has DC in it? Is it just Virginia? You're the Americans, you tell me. Whichever one has DC. Their state elections came down to one vote in one district. Their state house was at 50-50. And if one more person had voted Democrat, then they would have had a Democratic legislation. And that Democratic legislation could have drawn the district lines. They could have ungerrymandered the state, in other words, so that people were represented. One person didn't. It came down to a coin toss. It came down to an exact tie. And they flipped a coin for which representative would get the seat. And the red team got the seat. And the state stays gerrymandered, right? So sometimes, in special, unique circumstances, one vote makes a lot of difference. But on the grand national scale, with 3 point, I don't even know, millions and millions of voters voting. Does your individual vote change anything? I can't say that it does. The problem is that when lots of people stay home on election day, then we make bad decisions. Democracy relies on the input of a lot of well-informed people, right? And if we can demotivate people, if we can get people to stay home on election day, then our misinformation tactics and our disinformation tactics and our disenfranchisement stuff, convicting people of minor drug crimes so they can't vote kind of stuff, and our cheating, right? All that matters more. The more people vote, the more cheating I have to do out in public, and I get caught, and the numbers just overwhelm it anyway. A few people vote, then my cheating really matters. Okay. So at the moment, American democracy is suffering from low voter turnout and therefore a lot of problems. Next dilemma, the prisoner's dilemma. We have two people suspected of a crime and we isolate them, right? I'm going to interview this guy over here. You're going to interview that guy over there. And the only evidence we have is the testimony of the individuals. So I'm trying to get one to flip on the other. We're going to offer them a deal, right? Whoever talks first gets to go free. They have to testify against their friend, but they'll suffer no consequences. The thing is, the only evidence I have is their testimony. So if both of them keep their mouths shut, they both go free. So my job as the interrogator is to convince person X that person Y is flipping on them right now, right? Here's the deal. The deal expires in 1 minute. We're making the same deal to your buddy right now. I have a feeling they're going to spill their guts. They don't look very strong here. You talk, You go free. Someone usually flips. Getting, both people with the inability to coordinate, getting them to stay quiet is very difficult. So that's the prisoner's dilemma. Again, your individual interests override the interests of the group. And we have the trucking dilemma, or sometimes the railroad dilemma. And the issue here is, let's call it railroads, it's easier. We have a section of track that we share. And to make profits, we both need to use that section of track. I can get around it, but I have to go a long way around it, and that eats up my profits in fuel and time, and paying people. Right, it uses up I lose profits on that. So we share this section of rail. How do we arrange to share that section of rail in such a way that we both continue to make profit? The more company X uses the road, the less company Y makes a profit, okay? And vice versa. And this really is set up so that we introduce threat. If it's a road, there's a gate, and if it's a railroad, there's I don't know, some other means where I can close the train track, right? So if you use the road too much, I can just close the gate and force you to back up. And if you don't give me what I want, I can close the road and neither of us is making a profit. Under that condition, threatening each other, this produces no benefit in lab settings. Both companies lose, in other words. We lose profits. We're not able to use the shared resource enough that we both profit. But, I mean, this might be the upside in the relatively more category, is that the one making the threat, the one willing to use the power to damage the other, they lose less than the person they're threatening loses. So there's an advantage, but it's not a real advantage, It's cutting off your nose to spite your face. Okay. Do we need to put that in the context of American politics, or can you figure it out? Individual characteristics, other orientation versus self-orientation. Obviously, right? The more other concern you have, the more likely you are to engage in cooperative activity. And there's a caveat here. The dual model suggests that the person who has a pretty good balance between self-interest and other interest, they're the ones who are really willing to do the work of solving problems, right? So imagine imagine a couple of scenarios. In the trucking dilemma, let's say that one party is only self-interested. Okay. Well, the only self-interested party just doesn't care if the other company makes any profit. And they're the most likely to produce the threat condition, right? Well, I'm losing, but you're losing more, and so I feel good. Um, if one party though has only other interest and no self-interest, then they just capitulate, right? They just give up, let the other company make all the profit and go bankrupt. That doesn't really solve any problems. It does for the other company, but it doesn't really produce any solutions. But if you have a good balance between self and other interests, then we're motivated to come to the table and work something out where we both profit. And that's where you get the road sharing, that we both make some amount of profit. Okay. What else? Gender. So it's a stereotype that women tend to have more other concern than men on average, but it's a stereotype that comes from somewhere. It's somewhat true. Okay. Men tend to be more agentic and women tend to be more communal, um, at least as a central tendency. So let's imagine we show up for a job interview and we pass the interview, and now it's offer time. You're applying for one of those weird jobs where they make you a salary offer. Yeah. And you could negotiate that salary offer. Men tend to ask for more and therefore to get more. And women tend to just accept whatever they're offered. And this accounts for some small portion of the pay discrepancies between men and women for similar work in the US, right? So white women make 84 cents on the dollar compared to white men in the workplace, even for similar work and similar occupations. As you go down the line in terms of race, it gets progressively worse. Hispanic women being the most vulnerable, making 54 cents on the dollar compared to white men, um, because they're the least likely to have legal citizenship status and access to lawyers and so on, to speak English and to have education and all that stuff. Um, so when we're talking pay disparities, when we're talking Lilly Ledbetter Act and all this stuff, an excuse that gets thrown out is exactly that women should just be better negotiators. We'll solve this problem by teaching women negotiation skills. And that's scapegoating, right? The problem is at the corporate level. Why is salary negotiation relevant to this position in the first place? If you have structured salary and everyone makes that salary, and then it's based on performance reviews and time and service, you get your raises, it wipes out, it doesn't completely eliminate, but it really more or less wipes out the gender disparities in pay at the companies where there is salary negotiation, right? Um, Yeah. What's the relevance? Why are we doing it this way? We could fix it. And culture, of course, obviously matters. Americans are really, we like to cast ourselves as rugged individualists. And so we're much more likely than people in more collectivist cultures to engage in competition and conflict. Other places, people don't like conflict so much. So how would we create cooperation? I'm not a moralist. I'm not sure, you know, why do you want to? Why do you want to create cooperation? Maybe there's some really big, important things where we're going to have to work together, like climate change. We don't address climate change. At this point, whether or not we address climate change, we're all going to die. But maybe it would be good to make some effort. Yeah. So we can tell our grandchildren as they're starving to death that we tried to do something. Well, this is a social psychology class, so if cooperation's your goal, the context matters the most, right? For example, this isn't Harvard. If you were in Harvard Law, then you might be in those classes where the professor has one A to give out, and you have to fight for it, right? One person's getting an A, 5 people are getting Bs, 50% of the remainder get Cs, and then everyone else gets a D or an F. Okay, now you're competing, right? You need that A. Everyone needs that A. Only one person can get it. You're competing. We have actually scarce resource now, right? And everyone needs that resource. The people with the 4.0 GPAs from Harvard, they're the ones getting the really cool internships. I have more than one A to hand out. Everyone who does the work can get an A, right? I've told you how to do the work, told you how to earn every point in the class, and then it's up to you to show up and do that work. Do the work, get an A. That produces more cooperative environments, right? Everyone wants an A, but everyone can get one. Let's work together. I'll help you study, you help me study. Right? I'll help you with this part of the research, you help me with that part of the research. Okay? I even try and set up situations to encourage cooperation. That presentation, ask each other questions. You answer a question, you get extra credit. Well, that means you ask someone else a question, they get extra credit. They then reciprocate and ask you. And now we're having these really great conversations based on the presentations. I really miss, it's terrible that we had to do that on the internet instead of in class. Hey, I'm going to use this video forever, right? I'll be like 75-year-old Dr. Diaz, and someone will miss a class and I'll assign him this video. If that's you, bear in mind that we only did presentations in class for this one term because of the COVID-19 response. Ask me, I'll explain it. So privatizing seems to kind of work. The commons problem, when we actually examine the commons in practice, there was not a ton of abuse of commons. The commons system was working. So when we make the privatizing argument, we have to take it a little bit with salt, right? In the lab, when people have their own resources to manage, then that doesn't require they trust anyone, doesn't require any communication or coordination. The more people there are in a collective, the more opportunity there is for distrust, and the harder it is to coordinate everything, right? So there you go. In practice, though, like, this is not a political statement. Privatizing the British rail system really profited a few people and cost everybody else, so just be careful. In practice, the common system was working nicely. Trust. If you can build trust, then people are going to cooperate. The more that you think others are screwing you over, right, the less likely you can trust them. And when you don't trust the other, then you look after your own interests first. Modern politics is divisive for a reason, right? When you're referring to people of the opponent party as traitors, that's a problem. You are causing them to then act in bad faith because they know that you are acting in bad faith. That's a winning strategy, though. In politics, that's a winning strategy. I'm begging you to stop making that a winning strategy. Prior group norms matter. So culture, obviously, but also subculture, right? Not a national ethos necessarily, but in our town, we do it this way. On our football team, we act like this. And in our company, we prioritize these things. And then communication, really good communication between groups, taking away accusation, blaming, name calling. The more that you can bring parties together on an equal footing, the better off you'll be. I just want you to watch this little video about Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was famous for his communication style. He's bringing together two really disparate parties to the negotiating table, right? There's the Afrikaans group, the 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 white South Africaners, who created apartheid and so forth, disenfranchised all the black South Africans and keep them in poverty. Really gnarly authoritarian government practices, political imprisonments. Nelson Mandela himself, for what was it, 20 years, a political prisoner. And then on the other side, the African National Party, and they hate each other. They hate each other. These guys, the sort of top-down hate, that contempt that you have so you can justify abusing people, these guys, as having been the abused party, right? Since these white people came to their country and messed everything up. But Nelson Mandela would sit in the room with them and offer them tea. Things are getting heated, and he's like, let's take a break for a second. Do you like tea? Do you like tea? Let's have tea. And now we're eating together, and he'll ask him each something personal. And just take the steam out. He just treats people humanly. Get them out of their political mind where you're rationalizing bad ideas and into your human mind where we're here together with problems. The collapse of the apartheid system in South Africa is one of the biggest surprises ever in international politics, right? It's like the Berlin Wall coming down. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody imagined it could happen. Nelson Mandela imagined it could happen. Winning strategies. If you're in these sort of social dilemmas, where are they? If you're in these social dilemmas, like, I guess the trucking dilemma is the most relevant one. Tit for tat. So um, you start off forgiving. You make the best decision that you can, and then, like, you share. The thing is, we both share. We both get a partial reward. So I open with sharing, and then I follow whatever you do. So I open with sharing, and then, but you open with selfish. Then in the next round, I'm selfish. But in the next round, I'm selfish, but you're sharing. Then I switch to sharing, and I forgive you. Right? If you switch back to selfish while I'm sharing, then in the next round, I I go to punishment. And if you switch back, I forgive you and I go back to sharing. Long term, that's the best strategy. And in the long term, the more people do that, the better the strategy is. Everybody wins when we do tit for tat. Okay. Um, good. So just a couple more terms. Negotiating, that's when the parties agree to come to the table and argue in good faith for their position. We're going to try to compromise. Everyone's going to give something up. We're going to try and get the best outcome for everybody, right? That doesn't mean the best outcome for each individual. This is American democracy, one more time. In American democracy, it's not important that I get what I want and you get what you want. It's important that we get what we want. And the more people vote, the more we get what we want, instead of one side winning and the other side losing. Okay. In mediation, there's some reason we can't overcome our antipathy, right? Our hatred is making it so we can't sit at that table and do our own work. So we bring in a mediator, and the mediator gets the conversation going, finds out what the interests are between the teams, interprets if necessary, right? What I hear them saying is what they want is this. What I hear you saying is what you want is that. And then maybe even proposing solutions like, these are both kind of unrealistic. I mean, reasonable from your position, but realistic. But if you would give up this and you would concede that, then we could get to this arrangement. And that's probably the best outcome for all the parties, don't you think? And we can have a special kind of mediation called binding arbitration. And in binding arbitration, maybe we've gone to a lawsuit and the judge has just said, if you'll agree to binding arbitration, we'll waive the court fees. So then what happens is a special negotiator appointed by the court is going to make the decision. You both present your case and then they arbitrate. They say, what's fair here is X thing. And because you signed up to do this to avoid the court costs or whatever it is, what they say then is what you do. That's a little bit of a last-ditch effort because we absolutely cannot come to agreement. There's no way we can even sit at the table and begin negotiating. We can't agree. Um, yeah. One of my favorite movies that I never watch, it's called A Civil Action. John Travolta's an environmental lawyer, and some company's been dumping chromium into the water. It's that kind of a story. About two-thirds through the movie, the company comes back with a settlement, and it's not much less than he's been asking for. And the other partners are like, yes, yes, you should take the settlement. He goes, no. The negotiator says, but why? And he says, because you're willing to pay it, right? The only outcome he'll accept is more than the company's prepared to pay. We're never going to reach an agreement, right? Well, that's a case for binding arbitration. Someone else make the decision at this point. Um, hey, we did it. We did it together. We're finished with chapter 12. We are finished with the course. Congratulations, you made it. It's been my pleasure, and I'll see you around the campus, hopefully. Okay, bye.